Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Dion. I'm City Councilor for District 5 and the Chair of the City's Finance Committee. This evening, we're hosting a joint conference with the School Department's Finance Committee for the purpose of discussing their proposed budget and to move it forward eventually to the City Council for their final review. A few comments before we begin. Chair Burke from the School Finance Committee and I have discussed the agenda this evening, and I have agreed to follow that agreement as to how it will be presented. Some observations. This is an opportunity for the school department, its representatives, to outline their budget, the cost of that budget, its impact on the city in terms of property tax revenue that might be needed, and their vision as to what's important for the children of this city that attend our schools. Our job as city councilors on this committee this evening, and for our colleagues that join us from the council at large, is to allow for a full discussion by school representatives about their budget. We're here not to substitute our good judgment for what they think are policy and program priorities in their budget. We're here to get clarification, if we need it, on the components of that budget so that we can be, and pardon the pun, educated as to how those priorities were established and why they're important for the school department, so we can make an informed decision with our colleagues on the council as a whole in the future. I would hope that this evening is an engagement that will respect all the parties that participate. I hope that our questions are not designed to be adversarial, but simply to expand our understanding of why the school department, through its school board and the superintendent's office, is presenting this particular budget with these particular components for our consideration. So with that said, I'm going to turn over this portion of the meeting to begin it with Chairman Burke.
Thank you, Councilor Dion. Thank you to the Finance Committee and City Council members for hosting us again this evening. Councilor Dion, I appreciate your graceful collaboration to ensure we can have a productive joint meetings both last time and this evening. Tonight, we will share some updates with you on the budget that the school board has approved and which was presented by the superintendent and Chair Figdor this past Monday to the council. Tonight, we have Superintendent Botana, Executive Director of Finance Kathy Winchenbach, Director of IT and Data Gavin Goodall, Board Chair Emily Figdor, Board Member Yusuf, and Student Representative to the Board Jody Dayu with us. In total, the amount of the budget has changed only slightly since we were last before you, but the impact to the tax rate due to that change is zero, leaving the increase at 4.1%, just as it was last time we were with you. The superintendent will highlight how we continue to prioritize investments to better support special education and English language learners, as well as bolster our support for students and the challenges they and their families face outside of our schools with an increase in social work staff. This year's budget prioritizes a relatively small increase of investment towards positions supporting such students and is part of a much larger arc of investment in these students, almost double what was present in 2016 to 17. I'm proud of the work that the superintendent, staff, and board members, both past and current, have done over the last 5 to 6 years to truly center equity in our district, to increase long overdue investments to address district shortfalls. And I believe the district is turning a corner when we look at outcomes. But these investments take time to work. There is no overnight answers. As was true last time we were with you, this is a rigorously considered budget with a significant increase attributed simply to year-over-year increases. In a year with a record high inflation rate, and still it's no exception to any other. There is also an increase in debt service, but the superintendent and school board planned ahead with when the windfall of relief money came to us to use as reserves to offset some of these increases this year and for the next couple of years. Again, aiming to reduce the impact on taxpayers while also investing in our students and educators with updated facilities that were overdue for such investments. So thank you again for hosting us. I will turn it over to the superintendent to walk us through some more information and then look to you, Councilor Dion, to facilitate any conversation you deem appropriate to have before we close tonight.
Thank you, Chair Burke and Superintendent. If I may interrupt for a moment, I just want to take an opportunity for school board and school department members to introduce themselves to the audience so that those listening or watching are aware who you are. And when they've concluded, I would ask my colleagues from the committee and the council at large to identify themselves as well.
Would you like me to begin?
That would be helpful, Superintendent.
I'm Javier Botan. I'm the superintendent of schools in Portland, and good to see everyone and happy to be here tonight. I think I will turn it over to our Executive Director for Budget and Finance, Kathy Winchenbach.
Good evening. I'm Kathy Winchenbach. As Javier just mentioned, the Executive Director of Budget and Finance.
And then also from my staff is Executive Director for Data and Technology, Gavin Goodall. Gavin, are you there? I see your picture. Great. And then I'll turn it over to Chair Figdor to maybe introduce the school board members.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and thank you, Chair Dion. I am really pleased to be here with you all tonight. I'm Emily Figdor, the District 2 School Board Representative and the current Chair of the School Board. And I will turn to Mr. Youssef to introduce himself.
Thank you, Chair Emily Figdor. My name is Youssef. I'm a school board member at large. I'll turn over to Mr. Park.
Yes, hello again. My name's Adam Burke, they, them. I'm the District 3 representative and chair of the Finance Committee. And over to you, Student Representative Dion.
Hi, my name is Jody Diu, and I'm the student representative for Portland Adult Education.
And maybe I'll just mention that myself and, of course, Mr. Burke, Chair Burke, and Mr. Youssef are the Finance Committee members this year, just to make sure that that the folks listening and everyone knows. So thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce ourselves.
Just very quickly, we also have Henry Gio, who is our production specialist, and he's behind the scenes. He runs our TV station, and so Henry is also, you'll see his name down there. So.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'd ask the committee members to identify themselves, followed by city councilors who have elected to participate with us this evening.
Hey, I'm April Forninger, at-large counselor and member of the committee. I will hand it over to my good friend, Anna Trevorrow.
Thank you, Councilor. I'm Anna Trevorrow, Councilor District 1 and member of the Finance Committee. I'll just head over to who I see next, which is Councilor Chong.
Hi, my name is Tate Chong, and I'm a Councilor representative for District 3, and I'm not on this committee, but I will turn this over to Councilor Rodriguez, who I see next.
Good evening. I'm Roberto Rodriguez, at-large Councilor and not a member of the Finance Committee. Andrew, you want to take it on?
Hey everyone, Andrew Zaro, District 4, pronouns he, him, not on the committee, but happy to be here. Who do we have left?
Well, we have left is the mayor. She couldn't be here in person or on screen for that matter, as her responsibilities take her elsewhere. However, she is participating by phone. And if you could say a few words, Madam Mayor.
Hi there, everybody. I'm sorry to be doing this by phone, and I apparently just rejoined at the right time because the call dropped. But I'm here. I'm on my phone. I can participate. I just can't see you. So I really appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. I look forward to a really constructive meeting. Thank you to both Chair Burke and Chair Dion for setting the stage for a good, productive meeting this evening. And Councilor Dion, I will. I don't know if I can raise my hand on the phone, but I can text you if I want to raise my hand. So I'll do that, but otherwise I'll mute myself and I'll be happy to be listening as you go through the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If you text me, then I'll get you on to speak as well. From the city side, we're also joined by Brendan O'Connell, our finance director. Are you with us, Brendan?
Yes, I am.
And your deputy?
Yes, I'm here as well.
Thank you, Ann. Okay, so that's the team. I'll defer back to the superintendent now for his remarks.
And I believe we we forgot Councilor Pelletier, but we had a chance.
Oh my God!
So and she's not on camera right now, so that might be why we.
Good catch, Superintendent. Here she is. Would you like to say something, Councilor?
Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Pelletier. I'm the counselor for District 2. I'm not on the committee, but I am happy to be here and see everybody. So thank you.
Thank you. All yours, Superintendent.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
We can.
Great. So what I'm not sure, if I do this, are you seeing the agenda right now? Because I'm not seeing what you're seeing.
I do see the agenda, Superintendent.
Perfect. Okay. So good evening. This is what we have scheduled for tonight. I think as Chairman Burke said, we are going to provide a little bit of an overview of our budget process and timeline. We're going to talk a little bit about where the budget stands today after it's been approved by the board. So that's slightly different, as you heard from what you saw back on March 24th when we had the first joint finance committee. And then we have a set of questions that we tracked from the meeting on the 24th that we've attempted to answer. And so we're going to go through those. And we've had a couple of additional questions that I believe came from Councilor Dion to Mr. Burke that we will also address today. So traditionally, this meeting is more of a just sort of catching up. We now have a budget that's, is that better? That's why.
It is.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, for helping me out with the technology. So traditionally, this meeting is more of an opportunity to sort of review any outstanding questions and then have the board and the council discuss the budget as it stands. So here's where we are. As you know, the school board approved the budget. So the next step is for the council to take up the budget, and you are scheduled to vote on it on May 16th right now. And then obviously it goes to the referendum later in June. So this is where we are. And this is, in fact, the same as you had seen previously, because as Chair Burke mentioned, there has been a slight increase in expenditures, but that's offset, and I'll talk about that in a second. So this is where our current budget puts us, is an increase of 28 cents to the school portion of the tax rate, raising the tax rate to $7.05. And for a home assessed at $365,000, which is our understanding of the median assessed value of property in Portland, that represents about a $102 increase annually. This is the overview of the proposed budget. So the total budget is $133.1 million. That's up from $126.5 million last year. That represents an increase in the approved budget of about 5.2%. Last year's increase from the previous year was about a 5.5%, so just slightly higher than this year. And the tax rate increase that our budget produces on the school tax rate is 4.1%, which is also just slightly higher than what it was last year. What's changed since you last saw this budget is these are the positions that were added as a result of our Finance Committee review and subsequent approval by the board. So we added a social worker at Rowe School, a third of a social worker, so making that a half-time position, working at both of our island schools. And then just based on our staffing allocation formulas, there was the need for an additional half a ELL teacher at Lyseth and half a ELL teacher at Deering High School for a total of $153,295. And we used additional reserves to pay for that. And that's why it has not produced any kind of a increase in the tax rate or the tax levy. So I don't know if you have any questions about that before I move into answering some of the questions that had been posed at the last meeting.
I'm not seeing any hands up, so I would continue, Superintendent.
I think Councilor Fournier has her hands up.
Wait a minute. Trying to run this column of straight. Okay, no, I even have Councilor Fournier. Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you. I think I'm the only one. I think I see I'm the only one with the hands up. Superintendent, I wonder if you could just really briefly explain when you say you used reserves for those positions, just remind us what the reserves are. Thank you.
Yeah, so reserves are basically the money that isn't used in previous years goes into a reserve. There are a variety of reserves. When we talk about one of the additional questions that was posed later in the agenda, we're actually going to show you what all of our reserves look like. So I think you'll get a much more detailed answer at that time. And you'll also see how much we're actually accessing in reserves for this year's budget. Great.
Any other questions? No?
Okay.
Go ahead, Superintendent.
Great. So these are the questions that we're going to be addressing. These were, you received a preliminary version of these answers shortly after the meeting, I think the following day. So this has been updated slightly, but it's similar to what you have in the packet that you saw previously. So we're going to start with a couple of questions that Councilor Chung had asked. These two slides were in our presentation, and Councilor Chung asked us to also show so both of those slides, this one showed the way that our special education students compare to our non-special education students. And this one showed how our students who are English language learners compared to students who are not English language learners on our new state test. And Councilor Chung asked us to also share what those data look like by race. So that's what you have in this particular slide. As you can see, it is consistent with what we, the point that we made with those other slides, that we continue to have a significant gap between those subgroups that we were talking about in those particular slides, which were special education students and students who are English language learners. And that's also true between our white and non-white students. We also had this slide in our presentation on 324, which really was showing the changes, and the point we were making with this slide was that, we have seen progress in the area of suspensions, both in terms of the number of suspensions as well as in the disparity of those suspensions. So it was difficult to see. So we provided this table instead. That, again, the big points that we were trying to make with that is, a reduction in the total number of suspensions year over year, and then also that that's slightly less disproportionate. And I do want to stress slightly less disproportionate. It's actually, there's still a slight increase in the suspensions of African American students, but a decrease for our Latinx students, our students who are multiracial, and a slight increase for our students who are white. So the point is the same point that we made then, but I think this shows it in a much more accessible way than those graphs did. So I think I'm going to move on unless I see somebody raise their hand, or I can stop and wait, whatever you prefer.
You can continue, Superintendent. I'm trying to monitor the hands while you're speaking.
Okay. All right. So the next question was for us to explain a little bit about the state funding and how that's determined. And this, I believe, was Councilor Trevaro's question. And so this is an analysis of our state funding, what's called EPS, the Essential Programs and Services, for last year, for FY22, and the preliminary, and this will change over the course of the year, but this is the preliminary FY23 EPS. And so there's a couple of there are a couple of key areas that we want to highlight. So the Essential Programs and Services, what it does is it basically says, as a school district, this is how much, according to the way that we calculate, this is the state talking, according to the state way of calculating what you should spend, this is how much you should spend, and that's this amount that you see here, the total operating allocation. And then this is how much you as a community should contribute to that. And so what they're actually using to arrive at this number of the local contribution is the assessed valuation of the community. And so communities like ours that have very large assessed valuation at 12.5 billion on the state's valuation, 14 plus billion in the city's new valuation, those communities will be expected to carry a significant part of the load. And so I use this example of Lewiston and Portland, with Portland and Lewiston being the two most diverse districts in the state, having similar size of population, having similar diversity, and where in our instance, the state pays about 16.2 is what we're projecting for next year of our total cost of education. In Lewiston, it's closer to 80%. So because their valuation is significantly lower than ours, the state's formula, which is an equity formula, says in a community where the local property values are not enough to be able to pay for that expected cost of education, the state picks up a bigger portion of the tab. And, in a community like ours, it expects us to pick up a larger portion of the tab. So I I don't know if that's helpful. It's obviously a very high level. There's a lot of complexity to that formula, but I think in terms of helping people to understand the broad strokes of how that works, that's what we were trying to do.
Councilor Chong.
Thank you, Chair Dion. Superintendent Botan, it's been a while, but when the state says that, your EPS budget should be $92 million, is that based on what they assume would be mandated programs, and anything above that is kind of like our own budget? So the difference in what they think is mandated is $92 million. That's basically what the local school budget should be. And then local municipalities like us, I can't even say it today, municipalities like ours, we can choose to go above and beyond the mandated program. So that's why our budget is 133. And so, that $41 million difference is things that the local budget decided to add on beyond mandated programs. Would that be accurate?
That's 100% accurate, Mr. Chung. Yes. Anything else? Should I move on?
Move on, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you. So I believe Councilor Fournier also asked about, or maybe this was Councilor Trevaro. I know I have in those questions. Asked for a, I see Councilor Rodriguez has his hand up. Is it back or going forward?
Yeah, it's just a follow-up to that last piece of information. Is it how uncommon, or how does our expenditures above what the state calls for, how does that compare to other municipalities?
It's similar. I mean, we did not bring it because that was not one of the questions, but we can share that as a follow-up analysis of how much more we spend, so just across the board, every school district in the state, pretty much, certainly all of the comparison ones that we look at traditionally, including Lewiston, spend more than what the state, what that state operating cost is. And it ranges from, 103%, I remember is the most recent number that I remember for Lewiston, to, nearly twice of what that operating cost would be in communities like Falmouth and so on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions before the superintendent continues? Seeing none, go ahead, Mr. Superintendent.
So we wanted to just provide a snapshot of where we are with our federal COVID relief funding. This is all sort of now understood to be ARPA, but, in our case, it has a couple of different names. And so we're focused here on our SR2 and SR3. Those are, that's the name of the federal funding for education that came through the ARPA. So this is SR2. It was the second round of funding that came. The school district received about $8 million. We've got all of that accounted for, so assigned out to specific activities that were agreed to by the board last year when we received these funds. We still, obviously the school year is not done. We will do a analysis. As you can see, we had not spent $2.6 million of that on February, at the end of February. So we'll see. There will likely be some places here where there will be some additional money at the end of the year. And these funds are good through next school year. So the totality of this coming year. This is SR3. This was the most significant infusion of funding. We received about $18 million in that third round. This came in, towards the end of last fiscal year. So the $18 million, we have submitted an application to the Department of Education, which you see here, the broad categories for that. So in this column, these are the general areas in which we have sort of set out money. We have a large amount of, over $4 million that we set aside for social emotional learning and recovery. So that money we've not tapped. This is the money that we discussed last year using for some form of participatory budgeting as a community. And so our focus this year has been on, being able to return to full-time in-person instruction. You can see that we dedicated a significant amount of money to that. We dedicated a significant amount of money to summer school activities for both last summer, this summer, and next summer. And so some of the summer school money was in SR2, and then we have money for this year, $2.5 million, another $2.5 million for next year. So again, we're not done with the school year, so we will take stock and determine what we have. So we minimally have all of the summer school money, the social emotional learning recovery money that have not been touched at this point. And then, some of these activities, as you know, it's been difficult to fill every position. So there are positions that were budgeted that have not been filled. So I expect that we will have, a significant amount of money still left in ESSERF at the end of this year. And again, that money is good for 2 years, this coming school year and the following year. Any questions about our federal funding?
I'm not seeing any, Superintendent.
All right. So then I think this is the last set of questions that we had at the 324 meeting was, we included a few things in the budget that we talked about at that time. And we were asked, what are some of the things that are not in that were priorities that you did not include in the budget, and what are the associated costs of that? So the next couple of pages, detail what those total investments would be. And these are activities that were not advanced. I will point out that among them was the social workers that were approved through our finance committee and board process. So these are italicized because we actually did add those into the budget since you saw this on 324. So it's things, again, consistent with what we've said in terms of our priorities. It's things that are primarily focused around our serving our students who are English language learners, our students with disabilities. We're the bulk of those additional investments. So, any questions on that?
Not seeing any, Superintendent.
Okay, so here's, this is new information. This is where I believe, Councilor Dion, you had asked, for us to sort of show a high-level picture of what our, what our priorities, as we talk about them, are always about special education and English language learners. And so what has the school district been doing in this area, over time? And so we basically went back to FY 16 and looked at, the increases over that period of time. And so you can see that, those are the areas where we've made tremendous amount of investments and increased the amount of money that we spend on things like services for students with disabilities, students who are English language learners. And we also put in here, because we've just been in the process of doing this analysis for a story that the Press Herald is writing about our adult education. And so we thought it would be also important for you to see that we've increased our investment in Portland adult education very significantly since 2016, sort of doubled our investment in that. And, I always talk about the fact that our investments in adult education are investments in, our students and their families. So I think that is consistent with, our focus on equity as a school district. And then we had also been asked to talk a little bit about and this is to Councilor Fournier's question earlier about reserves. We're going to dive into this. I'm going to ask Kathy to walk us through this, but it's really helping you to understand specifically the debt service reserve that we created last year with the council's approval, and what the strategy is behind having created that reserve. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to walk you through that.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, everyone. In July of 2022, the state had increased our EPS subsidy by $6.2 million. And we proposed, and it was approved, to amend our FY22 budget to reflect this amount. And how we used that was that we put $1.5 million to maintain the FY21 combined tax rate. We put $1.3 million to include the federal funded custodian salary and benefits into the local budget. At that time, we had removed $1.3 million of custodial salary and benefits to the federal grants, the SR3 grant that was mentioned earlier, and felt that it would be beneficial to include that back into the budget so that when the federal funding ended, we would be covered. And then $3.4 million of that was designated to create a debt service reserve. So for FY23, we now have $3.4 million set aside to help fund our debt service payments. We're proposing to use a quarter of that debt service reserve, which would amount to about $850,000 to offset the FY22 tax burden. So this would offset the additional approximate $950,000 in our BFOF, our building for our future bond interest payments that are anticipated for FY23. And then for FY24 through FY26, we're proposing to use that same amount in each subsequent year. And this is just more of a graphic to show that the use of fund balance last year in total was $770,000. And then we're proposing this year to use 2.1. Actually, I believe that's gone up a little bit because of this was the Finance Committee recommendation, but you'll know that would be the same. I'm sorry. It would be 2.1 million. And that 2.1 million that we're proposing to use for fund balance is broken down in the section below as a use of unassigned fund balance, restricted fund balance for our CTE programs, our reserve for debt service, which is the line that we're talking about today, and also by fund. So that for $850,000 reserve for debt service, the quarter that we would like to use for this coming year is reflected here and ties the total by fund, and all of that will tie back to the use of fund balance. But this is just one component of that as a separate reserve.
And I think we took out the slide that had all of the all of the different the fund balance analysis.
Yes, I know. As you were talking, I think we did.
Yeah, I can include that in our follow-up information for the finance committee. That will break down, all of the funds, including the unassigned, the restricted CTE, and the restricted debt service fund.
That would show how much we had in total. Yes.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, and I think that's all that we have for today. So we obviously have some additional questions, and we will send follow-up information on those.
Thank you, Superintendent. Before they end their portion, is there any final questions from anyone, my colleagues or members of the school team, have for the superintendent? Seeing none, Chair Burke, I want to thank you, the superintendent and Chair Figdor, for presenting this evening, as well as your supporting staff and other board members. It's much appreciated.
Thank you for having us again.
All right, is superintendent, is someone going to take down your shared screen at this point?
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm asking you to do it because I know if I try it, I'll blow it up. So it's no commentary on your technical expertise at all. All right, then. Any questions from the committee at this juncture? Comments? If not, we're going to be moving on to a discussion with Brendan and his team on the city. But, oh, wait a minute. I knew April would do this. Go ahead.
I'm just testing your skills, Counselor.
It's a little easier now that I have you all in front of me as opposed to a stack of vertical tiles, which is much more difficult to manage.
Thank you. I just wanted to, again, say thank you to the school finance committee and the school board for bringing this forward. I know you've been, of course, following our conversations on council, both in finance committee and as a larger council, as we get these presentations for what our total budget is going to look like. And I know there's lots of concerns from the public, and I think all of us in how we're going to make this work, just as we're looking at continuing to provide the services we're committed to providing to students, but also really being mindful about how can we balance that for the whole city. And so I don't know that I have any more questions yet. I'm interested to see the slide that breaks down those reserves, and I think that might generate some more questions. But I think my only other question is, knowing that what's being presented now does have an increase that's being requested, and knowing that there are still some of those ESSER funds available, I just wonder at what point would it be appropriate to have some conversations around, do those funds get applied instead of holding them for future use? Do we look at that for this year? Just given when we were having these discussions last year, we weren't anticipating the strain on the GA that we've come to experience. We have lots of exceptionalities, I think, that have happened that we couldn't have planned for last year that we're still responding to this year. So I don't know that we need an immediate answer. It's just something I want to throw out there and have everyone to think about a little bit, because I do know we have lots of presses on the money that we're going to try and need for all of the services we have to provide as a whole city, not just as schools. So it's just a comment that I wanted to throw out and get us marinating, and maybe tonight is not the night we talk about it, but I just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Chair Figdor.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Councilor Fournier. I guess from my perspective, I'd suggest that we wait to see your budget since it is a work in progress, and I know we're waiting to learn if the state is going to act, and it just seems critical to have that information on the table before we start talking about anything more with respect to the school budget. And I do want to remind the council that when we look just at a straight rollover budget from last year, it would have been almost 12% increase. So we have worked very, very hard to get from that straight rollover budget of just under a 12% tax increase on the school side to a 4.1% increase. So I want to just keep in mind that we've worked hard to get to where we are. We think this is a budget that meets this moment. And of course, once we see your budget, I think that will be the time to have further conversations.
I appreciate your observations, Chair Figdor, and I and others recognize the work that's gone into creating this particular budget. But I identify with what Councilor Fournier was raising, because I think on the council side, we've had some experience, for lack of a better term, with the notion of using federal funds to recapture lost revenue and kind of stabilize that portion of the city's budget. So I sense that her question is exploring a similar strategy on your side, but notwithstanding the work that's been done by the school board today.
And just to, if I may just say one more thing, just to finish up, we did, the reductions that we made included reducing 19.5 FTE in classroom staff. So we reduced at every level, elementary, middle, and high school. We implemented, as you saw at our last meeting, very rigorous staffing formulas that enabled us to have a level of rigor that we haven't had previously. Before, we had a staffing formula for our elementary schools and to some extent with our middle schools, but now we have that across the whole district. And so some of the reductions that we were able to make were by implementing a very rigorous staffing formula and I know we went through kind of some of how that formula is even determined, but just wanted to bring that back so that some of what the work that we've done through our budget process is more transparent for you.
I appreciate it, Chair Figdor. I know I've looked at the evidence on the staff plan. I don't dispute what must have occurred in order to arrive at those numbers. And I'm equally impressed with the efforts that have been done by staff and the board to manage debt service. That's the most unglamorous part of a budget, but it has a lingering effect on the capacity to allocate funds for operational issues as we move down a timeline. With that, I now turn the floor to Councilor Chong.
Thank you, Chair. I know Superintendent Batana and Chair Figdor were at the Monday night's meeting, but just to give the rest of the school committee members kind of an idea of what our budget looks like and how quickly it's changed. When City Manager presented the budget potentially for the hotels, for people who are staying in our hotels, the packet was published on Thursday. By Monday, that number had to change by $1 million because we received so many people. And then at our Tuesday night's meeting, we found out that it probably is another million because we saw more people come on Tuesday night. We now have 1,570 people as of Tuesday, and today's Thursday, and I have no idea how many more people have come from Wednesday and Thursday. And to give you a sense, we have 1,570 people in our shelter system. That's more than the entire state had all of last year. And we had 190 people come to our shelters just in the first 14 days of April. So when we do our budget, we have to upfront the money and hoping that the state will reimburse us at 70%. And if appropriation passes at 90%, we are still responsible for funding that money. And then hopefully we'll get 90%. Even if we do have to pay 10%, it's more than we've ever budgeted before, because on an average year, we might see 400 people. Now we're seeing almost 1,600 people. So that budget is 4 times what we had allocated in the past. So just to give you an idea, like that's the kind of strain that we're looking at. And I believe that we're going to see a bigger strain come summer months. We have no idea how many more people are going to come, but my theory is that we will see more people come to Portland, relocate in the warmer months than we did in the colder months. So it's going to be a bigger strain on the city and all the services that go along with it. And so it's not just the Health and Human Services and G8 department that's going to be affected. Parks and Rec will have to be affected, police department, fire department, public health, because all those services are now being dispensed to this particular population and other people as well. So, and what we did with our ARPA monies, we backfilled about $8 million in revenue losses just to keep our taxes at zero for the past 2 years. And it's been a strain on the city, with what we had in the past. This is something we've never seen before. It's absolutely unprecedented. When we had people staying at the expo, it was about 430 some odd people, 230 some odd people staying at the expo. We're going to have to house about 250 people in the next 50 days, just from the hotels that are the contracts that are closing in Orchard Beach and South Portland. So it's almost as big as the number of people we had to house in expo in 2019, just in the next 50 days. And that's not including people who are coming. So I just wanted to give you a landscape of the kind of financial stressors that the city will be facing in the next coming months. So it's difficult for us to give you a budget, because every time we see new people coming, our budget goes up significantly in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Dion. I just wanted to share a few thoughts. First of all, about the work that the superintendent's team and school board did to bring down what the rollover budget would have been in terms of an increase. I think that was a challenging exercise, and just want to point to some gratitude to what is presented. When we think about how to use some of those ESSER funds to offset increases right now, like in any other budget, when you include FTEs in that exercise, you face a cliff at the end where, these things have to be brought back into the budget. And that, we're all familiar with that if we've looked at any budget. But what I want to point to that's unique about where we are right now is that the school board, the Superintendent Botana, has 2 more budgets to bring to the council before he's indicated that he's not going to renew his contract. And so we're going to see a transition at the top of the organization and leadership, which means that the school board needs to financially prepare the organization for a transition and hand over something that allows an incoming superintendent to have authority over spending, programming, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of the things that I particularly like about this budget, that there aren't any new programmings that are tied in that we then next year have a cliff to face, and then subsequently a new superintendent will have to be forced to deal with. So I think that this is a good first step in what I would like us to start referring to as a transitional period in leadership of an organization, which we've all acknowledged historically in public schools. Transition at the superintendent post has been one of the most disruptive things. We're very fortunate to have had Superintendent Botana here for such a long tenure. And that, just by virtue of having the same dude up there brings some stability. On top of that, he happens to have done commendable work. And we saw some of those examples today. And again, I want to prepare the board for what I think is a transitional period. And I think that this budget, if we were to add those ESSER funds to offset spending, potentially could be problematic as we face the transition in the next year and 2. So just my thoughts as I look at this from a holistic view. I also don't want to ignore what my colleagues have said, that on the municipal budget, we're facing significant challenges. I think Councilor Chong, better than most of us, can speak to that, and he just did. So I do want to underscore that that's the reality that we're all facing right now. And so please take on all of the comments from my colleagues as trying to be as transparent and realistic, and hopefully, create an understanding that we're all creating, or rather basing our decisions under the same understandings. So again, just thank you for your time, and I'll step back now so that I can hear the rest of my colleagues speak. Thank you.
Thank you,
By the way,
Councilor.
can I just say one last time, it's really interesting to see this process from this side of it, by the way. It happens a lot faster, way fewer meetings before we get to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Trevorrow.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to weigh in with a couple of thoughts here. I appreciate Councilor Fournier's reminder that we do certainly have some critical conversations ahead of us because we are facing a shortage of resources as usual, but in a particularly unprecedented way this year. That said, my thought about this budget is that there's nothing unreasonable being presented here. I recognize the care that has gone into fiscal responsibility in this budget and efficient use of resources while trying to keep on with the goals of the district. So I appreciate that. I wanted to just note with regard to the reserve, because I remember last year when we did that, we were facing revaluation at the time, and that was a controversial conversation that we had, whether to do that or whether to direct those funds directly back to the tax rate. And I think that it was ultimately a good decision to put it in reserve, because that leaves us in a place here where we're looking at, we have a 4.1% increase as opposed to, I don't know exactly what it would be, but it would be greater than that. So it's an example of what Councilor Rodriguez was talking about with strategic planning for use of these funds over time so that we don't have a bigger hit all at once in the future. And then something that is just kind of percolating, obviously from the city side, the greatest thing that we're grappling with is the issue of projected GA cost. And I just wanted to note that I think that the school district plays a pretty significant role with regard to meeting basic needs for asylum seekers and new arrivals in Portland. We're educating those children. I assume adult ed plays a role as well for the families. They're supporting feeding families and giving meals to students and after school programs, as well as I think there's probably grant funding through different areas that support that.
You're freezing up, Councilor Trevorrow. You may want to try just going to audio. I'm going to assume that Councilor Trevorrow can hear me. If that's the case, I want to turn to the superintendent for comments, and then I'll allow Councilor Trevorrow to pick it up when she gets back in connection. Are you there, Councilor Trevorrow? Superintendent, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I had raised my hand to make the point that Councilor Trevorrow was making about the fact that we do serve a large number of the students from the influx. because of the way that the influx has been addressed by the city with so many of the students being put in hotels that are outside of Portland, we have not seen the same level of increase in terms of the number of students that we serve as we would have if they were, for example, at the expo or something along those lines. But just to put this in context, I got a desperate email. I don't want to say desperate. Can you give me a call right away? Email from my colleague in South Portland yesterday, where they're looking at doing intake for an additional 80 students the Monday after the break. And so, he asked, is there any chance that we would be able to take any of those students? And so what we agreed was to work with them at intake and then, make case by case decisions on students where they have a direct line to somewhere down the road getting housing in Portland, because the challenge for us and for any district that receives students under these circumstances that they're considered McKinney-Vento, that's, homeless. And therefore, whenever they find housing somewhere else or wherever they're displaced to, they are still entitled to come to school in the place where they started for the remainder of that school year. So if a student is placed in South Portland today, and we have a good working relationship, we're already picking up kids at the hotels that, started at the family center, and we bring them to school on any given day. We, if they move to Portland, then obviously that's great. But if they move to Brunswick or Lisbon, we are still responsible for bringing those students back to Portland. So, while at this point we have not seen that the very large number of students that would result from that influx that you're dealing with, in some ways we're already experiencing it and have the potential to experience it, particularly if there is a Portland-based housing solution that, instead of, them going to, I spoke to city manager West yesterday, and, she said that they're in hotels as far away as in Auburn. So, that is obviously, school districts. I got a phone call from Yarmouth a week ago where they had 22 kids that they had to do intake for. And so, all of the districts in the area are being affected, which, as I discussed this with Danielle yesterday, helps to make the argument that this is a regional issue, that it's not a Portland issue. And so we've been engaged in those conversations with the Maine Department of Education. As I know, the mayor and the city managers and others have been with, state officials around, this is not a Portland, this is not a Portland issue. This is something that we all have to work together to find, because it is a regional, it is a regional issue.
Thank you, Superintendent. Councilor Trevorrow, are you able to finish your comments?
If my internet allows, my only comment was that this issue is just a reminder of how it behooves us to take a holistic approach to both of our budgets. I think resources to the school are resources toward a common goal. So, we'll learn more about our budget coming up, but, just thinking about how we serve the whole city between the two budgets from a holistic perspective. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you're back with us. Any other comments? I just want to chime in for just a moment. I appreciated Councilor Trevorrow's words, Councilor Chong's, and the superintendent. I work with Councilor Chong on public safety, as well as Councilor Trevorrow, and other councilors. But the point is, I hadn't really considered as deeply as it's been exposed to me this evening. The idea is that in those committees, in those contexts, we talk about families arriving, and we kind of calculate it as a housing issue. potential employment issue down the line, needs for social services. But this has given me an opportunity to step back for a moment and realize that the greatest opportunity we have to stabilize those families is to have a school that works for them. And I just want to put that out there. So early on, I think I mentioned it to Chair Figdor, I was okay to see an increase in ELL because that's just a common sense strategy for what the complexion of the demographics of our students are going to be. They're going to be from all over, and we have to have a capacity to serve them and meet their needs. So I, for one, do appreciate those observations that were made this evening by many of you. And I hope it informs us as we tackle a budget that simply can't be a rollover because it's going to just be a huge burden on the residents of the city. But we'll get through that process. Any other comments from the committee or others on the school department's presentation? Seeing none. Chair Burke, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again for hosting us this evening, for the thoughtful conversation and comments that follow the presentation. And we do look forward to seeing what comes forward on your side, and know that we're paying attention and being considerate in all our deliberations. And while we've passed our budget, and it's to you that where we do have common goals, and we're trying to do all we can to do right by folks. So thank you.
More than welcome, Chair. Chair Figdor.
Yes, and if I could just add, how much I appreciate this conversation, and to be able to see kind of an issue from all sides and how it's affecting our city as a whole. It's just, this dialogue is, I think, really helpful, and I'm just appreciative of the conversation tonight and the direction that it took. So thank you to everyone, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. This is how colleagues are supposed to behave. That's my final word on it. All right. I've tried to do this 3 times. I want to release everyone that's not from the city to go about their business this evening. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for those teaching moments that some of us had this evening. Much appreciated. All right.
Councilor, I just want to remind you, we did advertise a public hearing tonight. So I don't know if you were going to take public comment.
No, I will. Thank you for the reminder. We do have Mr. Rowe. You have the floor.
Thank you. George Rowe on Hanover Street. Just a couple observations. I think it's important. I think people never actually zero in on how our tax rate is calculated. On the finance department's little home page, there actually is a place, if you kind of click through, where the tax rate calculation is, there's a whole little spreadsheet that explains how that's arrived at. And one of the things that I think is important to recognize is that the valuation, I think it's like $14.5 billion. We don't actually yield that full amount when we apply that tax rate, because so much of Portland's property is under nonprofit tax exemption status. So we calculate the property tax rate, and over that $14.5 billion. And then what we end up doing is we give a lot of people a pass. And so we don't actually yield that the amount that we think we're yielding. And I don't think that's understood by the public very often. But the insight there is you actually have, you have a lot of tax revenue. We are a much wealthier community than we were a few years ago. And a lot of that is not being put to use. And furthermore, in the last couple of years, we've had this big run up in property. Every day there's a new headline about a more expensive property. And so the point being that if you're talking about equity and you're letting off the hook some of our wealthiest taxpayers, then you're not serious about equity, because we should be definitely pushing another revaluation so that we can make sure that the market that people are paying for their homes is the same or as close as possible to what their tax bill should be. Because otherwise, all we're doing is just subsidizing speculation, real estate speculation. I mean, if you're going to buy a $600,000 car, but you know your sales tax on it is only going to be $400,000, it makes it really easy to pay that extra $200,000, right? It's like a freebie. And we're handing out freebies all the time. We did it for 15 years, over more than 15 years, and we're doing it again now, probably for another few years. So equity means paying what you should be paying. So those of us who can't afford to pay or have difficulty paying aren't subsidizing those who have the most money, right? It works both ways. On the school budget, I think that really, if we're asking the school budget to tighten their belt and we're asking for draconian cuts because of other problems, we absolutely should be asking our wealthiest taxpayers to share that burden. And if you're not, then you're full of hot air and you're just trying to cause, a distraction. So that's my main point. I do actually want to make a point about the specific budget. There is no 990, the most recent 990 available for the Foundation for Portland Public Schools. And I think we owe it to ourselves to be able to see that. There's a significant increase in the subsidy that the Portland Public Schools makes in salary and benefits. And the justification for that increase is that there's supposedly a lot more revenue flowing through that entity to help the public schools. It's not obvious to me, because I've looked at the old 990s that are available. It's not obvious to me that that is really justified. And I think if you're going to make the case, you should have backup that, clearly shows that, a nice raise that most, on a percentage basis, I think it's significant. Most public school employees are not getting that kind of a raise. And I think if there's a track record there that's deserving of that raise, it should be very evident and clear in the record in the backup. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome, Mr. Rowe. Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment to this joint conference? Seeing none, I'll call it closed to public comment. Councilor John.
Thank you, Chair. I think we get that question almost every year during budget season, that we have too many nonprofits in the city of Portland. I'm glad that Brendan is here, because we've done several studies where the percentage of nonprofits that we have in the city of Portland is very similar to other large service centers like Lewiston and Bangor. As far as tax, property, and equity, we didn't have revaluations for about 13 years, and that's why we had to do it. We were going to roll it out in 2019, and then in 2020, COVID happened, obviously, so we didn't roll it out, and we didn't roll it out for 2 years, and we rolled out the property valuations of the tax bills last year. And so now it'll be more equitable ever than before, because City Manager John Jennings invested, I believe it was like $1 million, Brendan, in a new software where we're doing reevaluations in real time, as opposed to it being done, citywide. And so, I just want to let the public know that it's going forward, it's going to be more equitable. And then the other thing that Brendan can also speak to is that as far as taxes being collected, although commercial properties make up a small percentage of the over number of buildings in the city of Portland, they pay almost as much as the residential buildings. And I forget the ratio, it's like 1 to 4 or something like that. So, we try to be as equitable as possible. And I think with the revaluations, it's far more equitable than ever was before. When you didn't have revaluations for 13 years, there are parts of communities that were undervalued or overvalued for 13 years, and they either overpaid or underpaid for almost a decade, and it won't be like that going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other comments? All right, then. As I tried to do a few minutes ago, in contrariness to the agenda, I would like to allow our colleagues from the school board and the school department to be released from this meeting. They can go about their business, and we have other items to deal with. Thank you, everyone.